Namaste. Welcome to the Hindu Parenting Podcast. All parents want their children to be confident. To be truly confident and secure, children need to know about their religious heritage. We Hindus do not talk about our religion under the mistaken assumption that it is not a nice thing to talk openly about our religion or that it might offend other people. Well, the time has come to change that. So, who are we, the Hindus or the followers of Vedic Sanatana Dharma? How are we different from others? Today, we will talk about the main religions of the world and how Hindus fit into the scheme of things. What was religion like in the old civilizations? How did monotheism come about and why did it spread rapidly? Was Europe always Christian? We will answer these and many other interesting questions in a conversation with Dr. Rama Sesan, the author of a book on the rise of monotheism called From Gods to God. Rama Sesan has a PhD in electrical engineering and mathematics from IIT Madras, and he has just finished his postdoc from the University of Singapore. Namaste, Rama Sesan ji, and welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you. So we hope to learn a lot about religions today. The story of your interest in comparative religion starts when you were in high school, reading the Percy Jackson series of books. So many of our listeners would be familiar with these books for young adults. Can you trace for us how Percy Jackson led to you becoming a young author today?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I came across this series called the Percy Jackson series, authored by a American writer named Rick Riordan. So the basic theme of the book is that the Greek gods are still alive and they have children with mortals who are demigods. And
Hmm.
Percy Jackson is one such demigod, and the adventures of him and his friends are the subject of the series. So you will see all the myths of ancient Greece come to life in this fantasy genre. That was my first exposure to this fascinating world of Greek mythology. I enjoyed it, and it enabled me to become educated in the stories of Greek religion. But
Hmm.
I kind of asked, if these are Greek gods, then why
Hmm.
aren't the Greeks worshipping them now? Why is Greek Christian now, and entire Europe for the matter? So why did Europe abandon its traditional gods for a Middle Eastern god? So that was the question that enabled me to later research on paganism, as it is called today. So the author Rick Riordan also writes many other series, like the Cain Chronicles and all, which talk about Egyptian gods. And now he has also started writing, I think, regarding the Norse gods and all. I'm not
Hmm.
following that anymore, but yeah, this enabled me to ask and introspect. Was conversion happened normally, or was there something extraordinary involved? Because historians normally present the conversion of Europe and the Middle East in a very dry statistical manner, as though Europe became Christian, its people started to prefer burgers, So there is no element of personal, uh, turmoil that the converts would have went through when they accustomed to this new faith. So to bring about that aspect to it was what ultimately motivated me to write this book. And I'm indebted to that series because it shaped me in a lot of ways, right from what questions to ask, and it also enabled me to develop a taste for ancient languages because some of the quotations will be in ancient Greek and Latin in that book, and that kind of motivated me to later learn, those languages as well. Yeah.
Yeah, what I find fascinating is that, I mean, thousands of Indian children would have read Percy Jackson, but one person took it and asked questions, right? It all starts with asking the first question. So, what
Yeah.
happened to the gods? And I'm really finding that interesting. What would you say are the similarities between the Greek civilization and the Hindu civilization? Because from the books, they do describe many gods, right? And many of them have a parallel in the Hindu pantheon. Would you say that?
Yeah. In fact, one of the very first exercises that I used to do when I read about the pantheon of other deities is compare the gods and then tell, what Hindu god matches closely, to the given Greek god or a Roman god or Egyptian god. For example, I showed a picture of the Egyptian god Horus to my mother. She doesn't know anything about ancient Egypt. But the moment she saw the photo of the deity Horus, she said, "Hey, that is our Garuda, no?" So, because that god has a falcon, falcon head, and it looks like an eagle. So, uh,
I see.
even any lay person can engage in this experiment. And later I realized that this is exactly what the ancient Greeks and the Romans did. And it was a part of their theology called interpretatio. So whenever the Greeks and Romans used to conquer new peoples, what they used to do was they used to study their deities and then determine, who was their Zeus, who was their Poseidon, who was their Hades, and so on. And all the temples that and the rituals that the conquered peoples used to do for their gods, they would not deny them, and they would just treat them as local manifestations of their own gods. And even if a god could not be exactly mapped into a Greek god, the worship of a different god as such was not seen, was not seen as a crime or was not seen as offensive in the eyes of the ancient Greeks. And they themselves adopted foreign gods from other countries. For example, the Egyptian goddess Isis became very, very famous in the Greek ruled Egypt, and also in the Roman Empire eventually. So her cult spread so much that a temple to Isis has been archaeologically unearthed in London. Can you imagine where is London and where is Egypt? So the ISIS kind of spread from Egypt to London. So that is a very long journey, right? So and then we see Thracian moon goddess from Romania becoming adopted by the Greeks, and then the Romans adopting the Anatolian mother goddess who became Cybele eventually. And the first thing that the Persian king Cyrus did when he conquered the city of Babylon was to go to the temple of its patron god Marduk, and he paid the respects to that deity. So we see there was an understanding that the gods of other nations are not exactly enemies. They are just divinities in other form or whom we are not known about yet. And also, there are a lot of recurring themes you can see in all ancient civilizations, like sacred mountains, sacred rivers that heal, and then you have sacred groves, and then you have sacred trees, and then you have all sorts of local deities and local myths associated with each of them. Like the same Vishnu is we consider Puri Jagannath temple's deity and Tirupati's Venkatachalapati deity as the local forms of the god Vishnu, right? So
Mm.
similarly, there were a lot of local varieties of Zeus and Jupiter in the Roman pantheon. For example, you have Jupiter Capitolinus, which is basically Jupiter of the Capitoline Hill. So Jupiter was Jupiter, but Jupiter of the Capitoline Hill was special. He had his own stories and his own myths associated with him. So you can see that overall structure. You can find that any Hindu can read and feel at home that in the ancient world. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, so this is very fascinating, and it sounds so much like the Hindu worldview. So we encounter somebody with another god. It's okay, you can keep your god, we can keep ours. So what changed then, and uh, how did they become from gods to God? So we call that as monotheism, right? So
Yeah.
what is monotheism, and how is this different from the natural religions uh, which they replace?
The story of monotheism starts with Judaism. Unfortunately, the origins of Judaism are not that well known, and the only source that we have for many of the foundational events of Jewish origins are from the Bible only. We don't have any other corroborations. But what we can say for sure is that even the Jews started off as polytheists. They were worshipping other deities in addition to their own deity. And even in the Bible, even in the Jewish Bible, which is called the Old Testament, we can see their God is repeatedly referred to as the God of Israel, the God of Israel, the God of Israel. So, the first commandment that the God gives to the Jews is do not have any other gods before me. Now, that is interesting. When somebody says, do not have any other gods before me, it assumes that there are other gods, correct?
Yes.
Thus, that you are not supposed to worship them and you are supposed to worship only the God of Israel. And there are a lot of other things that also point out to this. For example, in the book of Judges, when the Jewish tribes are fighting the other tribes in the region, they will talk about stuff like your God has given you this land and my God has given me, Yahweh our God has given us this land. So from this what you can find out is that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, was an national God of the Jewish people, correct? Like each nation has its own special national god, right? Each family has their own kuladevata. Each
Mm.
like that, each nation also has its own special god, and the God of the Bible was just one such God. Eventually, what seems to have happened is that the Jews began to worship only Yahweh and did not worship the other gods that others worshipped. And then eventually, when the Babylonian Empire conquered the Jews and they were exiled, by the empire, that created a moment of crisis in them. So when you are in exile, when you are away from your roots, when you are away from your nation, when you are away from your holy land, then there is something the deep that stirs you, and you start thinking, where did we go wrong? And the prophets who arose just before that time and during the exile, the prophets convinced the Jews that what made them suffer this horrible exile was because they worshipped other gods, and they
Mm.
began to formalize the idea of monotheism. They said that Yahweh is the only true God, and the other gods of other nations are not gods. In fact, they are, subservient. They are just agents of Yahweh. And eventually, as you go to the later prophets, the other gods of other nations are further, dethroned, and eventually they are considered to be non-existent. So if you read the prophet Jeremiah, he will rebuke the Israelites and saying that, the idols of the other nations are just dead pieces of matter. They are not a living God. Only your God is the living God. But still, the Jews did not convert anybody to their religion for the most part. Outside of their land, because they still believed that they were the chosen people of their God, because God only chose them. So, because God chose Abraham and the descendants of Abraham are the Jews, so because they consider themselves as special or chosen among chosen people of God, they did not proselytize. That in late in the ancient world. But what happened was that they did deny that the other gods exist, and that made them get into a lot of trouble because when the Romans conquered the Jews, for example, and they asked the Jews to, perform a nominal worship for the emperor, for the spirit of the emperor. They did not, and that made them into a lot of that made a lot of problems. The fun part is that the Jews were persecuted in the polytheistic world because they were monotheists. That's the fun part. Anti-Semitism arose because Jews were monotheistic. So the Christians did not invent anti-Semitism; they just perfected it.
Oh,
So,
I
but
was just going
eventually,
to ask that
yeah,
question, where is the start of this persecution of the Jews come from? I mean,
yeah,
some of us know the story of Christ and Judas and all that, but somehow that doesn't sit completely. So, okay, so this is
yeah,
where it starts, huh?
yeah.
They
For
were
example, yeah, the Romans wanted the Jews to worship the gods of the Roman Empire, and it was not a problem for all the other people, because they were already worshiping many gods, and now they just start to worship one more god or another pantheon of gods. But for the Jews, it was not, and they refused to worship. And initially, they created a lot of problems. Eventually, understanding was reached with the Jews, where they agreed to pray to their God for the emperor, rather than honoring the state deities directly. So, but Christianity arose as a Jewish sect in the first century Palestine, or the Romans called it Palestine. What happened exactly was that at that time the Romans were ruling Judea, and the Jews were fighting for independence. At least some of them, they were resenting Roman rule, and they wanted a kind of Swarajya, like how they wanted a kingdom of God. They wanted God. They wanted to establish their own kingdom of God in Israel, and
So,
they built. Yeah,
are we talking about the same geographical area that is called Palestine today and that is called Israel today? The Israelites and the Palestine that you said. It's all the same geographical area, right?
yeah. Israel is the endonym used by the Jews themselves. Palestine is what the Romans call them, like Bharat versus India, you can say.
Okay.
So the thing is that some of the Jews at that time, they did, instead of directly rebelling against the Roman Empire, what they told was that God Himself would, send a descendant of David to defeat the Romans and establish independent rule in Israel. And such a figure was called the Messiah in Jewish theology. And Jesus was one of the many claimants to the title Messiah. And for the Romans, saying that you are a Messiah means that you are the descendant of King David, which means you are the king of Judea and not the Romans. So they consider it as sedition, and they crucified Jesus because he claimed himself to be the king of the Jews. And that is the context of the crucifixion of Jesus. Jesus was just one of the many Jews who was crucified for crimes against the Roman state. But after he died, his followers began to have a resurrection experience, and they converted an earthly kingdom of God to eventually, a universal religion where faith in Jesus as a resurrected God, a resurrected incarnation of God, was the means of salvation for all people, whether it is Jew or whether it is non-Jew, because the Jews themselves on the whole refused to accept Jesus as a Messiah, because the Messiah was supposed to defeat the Romans, correct? But Jesus did not defeat the Romans. Instead, he got defeated by the Romans. So the Jews refused to accept Jesus as any kind of important figure, whereas his own followers reinterpreted what the Messiah was supposed to do. They said that the Messiah was not supposed to, establish the kingdom in Israel, but instead the Messiah was supposed to die for the sins of the world and atone, and offer a path to atonement. So, but most Jews did not agree to that, and so the Christian movement eventually shifted the focus away from their own Jewish people to the non-Jews, also called the Gentiles. And
so.
the crucial
If I
man
can come
was,
in here,
yeah, yeah,
this actually gives a lot of this makes a lot of sense, because I've always wondered why the Jews refused to accept Jesus as Messiah. So what you, I mean, there is no one had told us the rationale for it. You have given that rationale that for them he did not defeat the Romans, and hence he could not claim messiahhood. Right?
Yeah,
That's the thing. That's very interesting. I've never known this. So this is very important. It's a very nice cog that falls into place in the story of these monotheisms.
yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah.
So it was the Christians who reinterpreted the concept of Messiah. They said the Messiah was not supposed to was not supposed to be a political figure who would defeat a political enemies, but he was supposed to be a godly figure who will defeat sin, not political enemies.
So
So
it seems
how
to be like a case of shifting goalposts here.
exactly? So the resurrection experience made them shift the goalpost, and they started reinterpreting the Jewish Bible passages and say that they predict the arrival of Christ. So they took random passages from the Bible and they said this predicts the arrival of Christ, and that's where you see the Christianity and Judaism become separate as religions go.
Okay, and then the Old Testament is the Bible, I mean, the so-called Bible of the Jewish people. Is that right? It's called the
Yeah.
Torah. Is that the same?
The Torah is the first five books of the Jewish Bible, and Christians inherited the Bible from Judaism and they called it the Old Testament. Uh, but eventually, soon, they began to consider the writings of their own early Christians as sacred as the Jewish scriptures, and hence that part they attached it to the Jewish Bible and they called it the New Testament. So for Christians, the Old and New Testament are a one whole set of holy scriptures which are connected. The Old Testament prefigures the New, and the New Testament kind of fulfills the Old. That's how they see it.
So
Okay.
In the Jewish scripture repository, there is both the Torah and something called as the Talmud. No, I've heard of these, but I
Yeah,
don't know what it
so
means.
the Talmud actually developed after the time of Jesus. The Talmud was put together. It was kind of like a um, it started off as a commentary to the Jewish scriptures and eventually morphed into its own tradition of interpretation of the Bible. So yeah, the Jews eventually began to adopt Talmudic interpretations of the Bible, whereas the Christians began to reinterpret the Bible in the light of the New Testament. So that's how the two traditions diverge after the
Oh.
death of Jesus.
Okay, so the Talmud is like a commentary on the Old Testament. That
Yeah,
is
it
what
is
you said.
it
Oh,
is it's a kind of like okay, it's kind of like rabbis debating with each other. That's what the Talmud contains. It contains the record of rabbinical debates and
okay.
which are supposed to guide how you interpret the Bible.
Okay. Okay, one more thing I wanted to ask. So, we know that these monotheisms do not believe in idol worship. So, where did that start, and how did that start? What did they have against idolatry? Because they all were born from idol idolatrous faiths, which
Yeah.
preceded them, right? So, what made them discard idols or murtis, or what we call as murtis, or images of gods? What made them remove those?
So that question is kind of difficult to answer in exactly, but as far as the Bible says, what we can tell, as far as the Bible says, what we can tell is that the Jews have prohibitions against idolatry right from the Torah itself. You are not supposed to make a image of the God. And we don't know exactly the reason why it started, but one definite thing one thing that would have played a role for sure is that it is one of the ways to distinguish yourself from the rest. When you're surrounded by enemies and you are threatened to be subjugated by your enemies all the time, you would kind of develop a generic hatred towards their gods as well, right? And saying that you won't worship any idols like they do, And it's like separating yourself and setting yourself apart from the rest of them. But in spite of that, we do see that in the Jerusalem temple where the Jews worshipped, they didn't have exactly an idol of the deity, but they had something called the Ark of the Covenant. If you have seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's based on that. So the Ark of the Covenant was a document kind of like replaced what the idol functionally it served as it serves the same function as an idol does in pagan temples, except that instead of the deities idol you will have the Ark of the Covenant in the altar of the Jerusalem temple.
What is that, though? What exactly is that
So
physical
the
thing?
so we don't exactly know how the thing look like. It's somewhat like a chest, that God supposedly gave Moses the Ten Commandments by writing on that ark. You know, it's supposed to be
Oh,
a
okay,
gold-plated wood chest that
okay,
God gave to Moses when he revealed himself to Moses at Sinai and gave the Ten Commandments. It's supposed to contain that. But
okay,
since nobody has seen it for a long time, we never know how it actually looked like. We just know descriptions from later texts.
okay.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Noah's Ark. That's the only other context I have heard the mention of an ark.
Yeah, yeah.
The main question that we come to is the old world had many different kinds of religions, and then only some of these religions, after the monotheisms came about, and even then, Judaism has not spread everywhere. But what you do see are the latter monotheisms, Christianity and Islam, that have spread everywhere. So now, what is the difference? What caused Christianity to spread and Judaism to just stay confined to a narrow geographical area?
As I said, Judaism, despite its monotheism, is still an ethnic religion, and Jews believe that they are chosen people of God. God chose Abraham, and the Jews believe they are the biological descendants of Abraham. So, when God specifically chose Abraham's descendants as his chosen people, they did not go about, they could not go about asking random people to join their community. So
Okay.
even today, converting yourself to Judaism is very difficult. Even you can almost never do so if you are not married into a Jewish family. But without marriage into a Jewish family, and if you just want to convert on your own, you are strongly discouraged. And even if you are married and you want to convert and adopt the Jewish faith, they'll make you undergo a lot of training and initiation and all such things. They'll purposely make it difficult for you. And it also matters that for the Jews, the chosenness comes from biology, whereas for Christians, they
Mhm.
believe, as Paul says in the New Testament, that God chose Abraham descendants because Abraham believed in God. So Christians reinterpreted that episode and said that anybody who believes in God, like Abraham did, are the chosen people of God. Christians believe that they are the new Israel, and the resurrection of Jesus makes them participate in this chosenness, participate in the chosenness as the chosen people of God by just having faith in Jesus. So in Christianity, you become a member of Israel through faith, whereas in Judaism, you become a member of Israel through biology. And that is why you see Islam and Christianity are very ethnically diverse, whereas Judaism is still ethnically confined and very low in numerical, in numerically, it is very low.
Right. So most people assume that Europe, for example, was always Christian. When we think of Europe or see, so many different works of fiction, all we see is the Christian heritage, the Bible. We associate Westernness with Christianity. But Europe had a past, North America had a past, and South America had a past, right? So when did Christianity arrive in Europe and the Americas, and how did that process happen?
So, people might not know that the entirety of Europe was not Christian until around 1400. So, Lithuania was the last nation to convert to Christianity in Europe, and they became Christian only around 1400, shortly after that. So, that is just almost the time when the Mughals came into India, right? So,
Mhm.
you see how Christianity started off in the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire did not cover all of Europe, and not all of the Roman Empire was Christian by the time the Roman Empire fell in the West. So the Christianization of Europe was neither inevitable nor quick. It happened through a lot of struggles and a lot of negotiations and
Mhm.
a lot of turmoils. That was a mix of strategy, politics, and missions. So uh, eventually, what we see for as a Christian Europe now was, not at all inevitable when you look at deep time. So I would like to spread awareness to my audience that they should also research on the pre-Christian faiths of Europe and see how they experience the conversion process, so that it provides lessons for us as well.
Okay, can you recommend some sources where people can get to know more about pre-Christian Europe, for example?
So for pre-Christian Europe, or in general, paganism in general, one of my favorite works is called Patterns in Comparative Religion by an author called Mircea Eliade. So his small book summarizes and looks across pagan religions, not just in Europe, but throughout the world, thematically. Like he takes sacred waters and then compares all the religions in that theme, and then he takes sacred mountains and then he compares many religions under that theme. So that's also another book written by the same author, which analyzes pagan religions historically rather than thematically. So it's called, I think, A History of Religious Ideas, and it is there in 3 volumes. So if the audience is very interested and can read long works, I think Eliade would be a good place to start. Even otherwise, Penguin has lot of books regarding paganism. For example, there is a Penguin collection of Greek myths, Penguin's collection of Norse mythology, and then Penguins also has a collection of Egyptian mythology and all. So that would be a good place to start, especially if you want to start specifically with a particular tradition. So these two, I would say, are my favorite resources to start.
So let's now move to Islam. So, what can you tell us about Islam and how much does it come after Christianity? And I think you can also touch upon how these two monotheisms spread across the world uh, and where they are today.
The first thing that we need to understand is that, there were Christians in Arabia before Islam arrived. So it's a very important thing to note. There were Jews and Christians in the Arabian Peninsula when Islam arrived. And the Jewish tribes were there for a long time in Arabia, but the Christians were all converts. So what happened was that as Christianity progressed in the Roman Empire, it began to experience internal schisms, divisions, and the eventually what would become as Orthodox Christianity began to persecute heretics out of the Roman Empire, and they began to suppress heresy, all sorts of heresies.
What does heresy mean?
Heresy means it's a sect where the beliefs that they hold are not in match, are not in approval of the Orthodox Church. So heresy is basically, again, whether you are a heretic or not depends on who is talking. For example, if you ask the heretics themselves, they will say, my sect is the true thing, and the so-called Orthodox people are the real heretics. But in
Mhm.
this context, heretics means any sect of Christianity that was not accepted by the mainstream, in the Roman Empire mainstream, which dominates today. So, for example, there were Christian sects that believed that did not believe in the Trinity. So, but right now we see Trinity is a very basic Christian doctrine. But in early Christianity, there were a lot of sects that did not believe in Trinity, and those sects which do not hold the beliefs of what eventually became mainstream Christianity are called heretics. And these
Okay.
heretics, when they were exiled out of the Roman Empire, they began to evangelize to the regions outside the Roman Empire. For example, the Aryans, who were one such heretic people, they evangelized the Germanic barbarians and converted them. So when the Germanic barbarians sacked Rome, the Roman Empire was not fighting a pagan enemy, but a heretical Christian enemy. Similarly, one such heretical group or some of those heretical groups seems to have gone to Arabia, and Islam was influenced by those kind of heretic versions of Christianity circulating in Arabia at that time. And Muhammad cannot be understood without the context of the Bible. Even today, if you look at the Quran, if you read the Quran, the first thing any Christian would find shocking when he opens the Quran and reads it is that it's very familiar to him, because all the same characters in the Bible and all the same stories of the Bible are referenced in the Quran. Just that the spellings may be changed to, in Arabic. For example, Abraham becomes Ibrahim, Noah becomes Nuh, and then Adam becomes same Adam, and then we have Moses becoming Musa, Solomon becoming Sulaiman, David becoming Dawood, and all, you can map, and it's the same story all over. So that's the reason why Islam should be regarded as just another Abrahamic religion, which follows the same worldview, overall worldview, that there is only one transcendental God. He only created everything. Everybody should worship only Him. You should not make images of Him. People who don't believe in them, people who don't believe in that God, they are those heathens, kafirs, or idolaters, whatever you call them. They have to be converted to the worship of this true God. And yeah, prophecy, the same kind of worldview, basic worldview is there in the Islamic tradition as well.
Okay. How did these? I mean, we talked about Judaism and said that they are not into the conversion business. Uh, but Islam and Christianity are proselytizing religions. Um, how did they spread, and what were the consequences of these two monotheisms spreading far and wide? Because they are like the majority religions in the world now. Actually, to come back to your thing about Lithuania converting only by 1400, that's really very recent, and
Yeah.
given the current situation we are in with the Middle East burning, we are hearing so many versions that say that the people of Iran are basically wanting to go back to their parent belief system,
Zoroastrianism.
yeah, Zoroastrianism. Um, which is actually older than probably Lithuania's conversion. So I mean, what stops, in your view, the reversion of these very recent converted nations into their older versions,
You're
basically?
saying
One
what
is, I
stops
think,
them?
one is, how did these two religions spread? And the second is, if there are so many nations that are so young in these two monotheisms, why, and if they find that it's in general, if they find that it's not acceptable, what stops them from going back to their previous versions?
Yeah, so the first thing that stops them is the disruption of continuity. Once traditional continuities are lost and traditional knowledge systems are lost, it is very difficult to, reconstruct a religion from some fragments that have survived. And Lithuania is not so bad in this regard because the conversion process was relatively very recent, and many elements of their pre-Christian religion still survive even after Christianization. So the Romulan religion, which is the native religion of the Lithuanians, has been experiencing a surge in recent times, and it has been legalized also
Oh,
under
is that
the
so?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Recently, it has been legalized, and you see many Lithuanians, adopting their Romulan faith. And
Okay.
some other religions are in a better shape, like take ancient Greek religion, Hellenism. Hellenism is also in a little better shape because many of the ancient Greek philosophical texts were the bedrock for Christian theology. And so somehow they have been preserved. Many ancient Greek texts have been preserved either as language textbooks for teaching the language, or they were preserved for because they were useful for Christians to interpret or to interpret their Christian faith using these older pagan concepts. So, for example, if you look at the philosopher Plotinus, he classifies the ultimate the one, as three kind of realities. There is the one at the top, the supreme spirit, and then you have the nous, which is the nous means intelligence in Greek, and then you have the world soul. So the Christians simply convert this into the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. So the God, the Father, is the equivalent of the one, Supreme God. And then the nous, which is the intelligence, became reinterpreted as, Jesus Christ, who is the Word of God, according to the Gospel of John. And the world soul became the Holy Spirit. So Plotinus was very useful for Christians. They kind of articulated the Christian faith in terms of these concepts. So in that process, we see much pagan Greek texts being preserved. But yeah, many other traditions are not in such a good shape. We don't have much of their memories because they were already not written down, and we even if they are they are not written down, and also since due to the disruption due to very early conversion, we have kind of absolutely fragmentary idea of what was exactly going on in those traditions. For example, in Germanic traditions, like in England or in Germany, we don't know exactly. We don't know the some amount, but we don't know exactly how it felt like to be a pagan there. So, of course, Zoroastrianism is still, the hope is still very alive, and Zoroastrianism is still a thriving religion. The numbers have diminished, yeah, but still the tradition has been kept thriving continuously. There is a continuity, and so there is more hope for Zoroastrianism. Uh, so
Does
yeah.
Zoroastrianism also come under paganism as per their classification? Now, just tell us very briefly what is paganism? What is classified as paganism? And does Zoroastrianism also come under that?
And are Hindus
Pagans.
also pagans?
Okay, so the word pagan has been, since it has been used for a long time, it has a lot of connotations. So, uh, when Christians saw their religions followed by their ancestors or their unconverted people, they found three things that are objectionable about those religions. Okay, one was polytheism.
Mhm.
They worship many gods. The other was idolatry, worship of idols. The third was sacrifice. Any sacrifice, material sacrifice or animal sacrifice or human sacrifice. Okay. So, so they began to portray these religions as barbaric because they practiced polytheism and they practiced sacrifice and they practiced idolatry, and they distinguished themselves from these false religions. So eventually, the word pagan technically actually means a villager in Latin. Pagus means a village in Latin. So By the time Christianity grew, it was an urban religion in the early stages. Okay, uh, it was city-based religion, and hence by the time of the fourth century, when this term began to be used for pagans, many Christians were in the city, and the pagans were found in the countryside. So the word pagan denoted pre-Christian religions because it was practiced in the countryside, and it has the same connotation of words like Dehati in Hindi, and it's basically a village brat or whatever. It was having that connotation, Village people follow outdated things, whereas city people are more advanced. So like that, the Christians thought village people are following the traditional outdated religions, whereas we are following this new true religion. So that kind of split. But technically, anybody who does not worship the God of Abraham is pagan, according to the Abrahamic peoples. That is the technical definition of pagan. But yeah, depending on the context, you find Protestants calling Catholics as pagans because they believe that they are as pagan as other actual pagans. So, but technically, it means anybody who has not worshipped who does not worship the God of Abraham, and instead follows these three practices: polytheism, idolatry, and sacrifice. Any one of these three is called a pagan.
Okay, so that coming back to how these religions, the monotheisms, spread, I noticed you were talking at one point a few months back about how it spread mainly in urban areas.
Yeah.
Now, was that a strategy adopted by the early proselytizers to catch hold of people in urban settlements?
Generally, in the ancient world, especially, proselytization is very easier in cities because cities are well connected. That is one thing. Very difficult to access the countryside, and the political pressure also is very difficult to seep into the countryside. Another thing is that in cities, the social ties that connect people to each other are kind of little bit lower. In a village, everybody is bound to everybody through some sort of familial or extra familiar or kinship or some form of mutual obligations. Even today, if you go to Indian villages, you can see that, right? So in village, you cannot isolate people and convert them one by one. That does not work effectively because they are a very bonded group. Whereas in cities, you can find lots of strangers living in proximity to each other, and people always migrate to city for jobs, and they stay in isolation. So very easier to convert people in cities because because divide and rule strategy, you can say. And
And also,
yeah,
ancestral ties have already been cut or are on the way to being cut.
yeah,
So I
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so that was one strategy, and there was another where the rulers of the kingdom, the kings, were targeted by having them marry a Christian wife, right? A princess.
yeah, yeah.
And so the conversion worked through the wife, and if the emperor converts, then um, he would make the whole kingdom convert. Was that how the Roman Empire fell?
No, the kind of because what we know is that Constantine, the first Roman emperor we have, right? So his mother was a Christian. His mother Helena was a Christian, and Helena's husband, who was Constantine's father, okay. So he was actually a pagan. He was a worshipper of some solar deity, as far as we can see. And technically, Helena was not exactly his wife. Christian sources and pagan sources are in unison that Helena was not the wife of Constantine's father. She was kind of like a concubine or something like that, and we see that Christianity was very popular first among all these uh, sections like widows, orphans, prostitutes, slaves, those kind of people who were abandoned by the society and did not have any support system. So they were the ones who would convert on en masse to Christianity in the early times. And so this is also not that surprising. But even after the fall of the Roman Empire, we see this strategic marriage where a Christian spouse converts her pagan king, and the papacy would be in constant communication with the spouse, saying, what's the, how is the progress going as far as conversion. So yeah, that is definitely one of the important strategies. There were actually seven strategies that the church used to convert pagans. The first is, as you mentioned, is marrying pagan kings to Christian wives. The second strategy was, priests, if the priests convert, then the other people also follow suit. That was one. And if the priests do not convert, what the church did was they created a rivalry split, or a split between the priestly class and the non-priestly class. That happened especially in the Celtic peoples, like in Ireland, where the Druids, who were the hereditary priestly class and keepers of the knowledge systems of the Celtic tribes, were targeted and portrayed as villains and magicians and evil people. And we see that repeatedly you invoked. The third strategy was building monasteries. A monastery was not just a place for monks to meditate, because Christian monks never, just sit around and meditate. They also involve in conversions, like how Sufis in Islam. They are not just mystic meditators. They played an active part in conversion, where the imperial sword could not reach. The Sufis in the Islamic world and the monks in the Christian world, they converted the countryside by being among the monastery in the built in the village, and eventually converting those villagers. And also the other strategy was, destroying temples. Destroying pagan temples was again another strategy invoked to convert pagans, because once temples are the lifeline of paganism. So if they are cut, then the religion becomes very difficult to survive. It becomes relegated to the private sphere exclusively, and it very difficult to maintain the fight. And then the other thing is, of course, assimilation. For example, in Ireland, there was a sacred well dedicated to pagan goddess Brigid, and there was also a festival dedicated to the pagan goddess Brigid. The church did not do anything. They just said, okay, celebrate the same festival, consider the same water as sacred, but instead of the pagan goddess Brigid, they said that honor the saint Brigid who has the same name. So all the gods are replaced by saints now, Christian saints. You assimilate rituals by using saints. And then you introduce a religious dimension in war. If a pagan king goes into a war with a Christian king, it's not just an ordinary imperial war, it's a holy war. It's a divine mandate. So, and if you have any rivalries in the royal family, that the church will support one side, and then they will eventually use that to convert. And then another, of course, was education. The church promised education for the children, for the princes of the pagan kings. So even if the pagan king was not that steadfast in the faith and even relapsed sometimes, the children would be very well grounded in their faith, and keep up to secure the future of Christianity in that kingdom. And of course, we had preaching and miracles, and then we have legal support, like using the law to weaponize pagan practices. So these were the main strategies that the church employed throughout to convert all the pagan peoples of Europe, right from the Roman Empire till Lithuania.
So this is all very interesting, and I think you told us that you have read these scriptures in the original. So what are the languages that you learned to to be able to read these scriptures, and what exactly did you read? Which of the religious scriptures did you read?
So most of the Old Testament is in Hebrew, and the New Testament is in ancient Greek, Koine Greek to be precise. And then many other Christian literature you find in Latin as well, especially related to Western Europe and Catholicism. So I got a handle of biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek just to read the Bible and some other early Christian literature. And then Latin I read to access the sources, primary sources in the Roman Empire. So that was, and I felt that was important because, language is uh, not just a language, right? It's a worldview. Take the word religion, for instance. The word religion right now, after Christian times, it has exclusively meant to be, Christianity. In fact, in Europe, after Christianity, the word religion meant Christianity. Okay, that no, not, but whereas in pagan times, the word religion was not like that. The word religion actually comes from the root, Latin root lig, 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 which signified the bond between a group of people and their gods. So the same root gives the word ligament. Ligament is a tissue that binds bones together, right? Similarly, religion was that stuff that bound the people to their gods. So it was a very broad and inclusive term, but now you see how narrow it has become. So language is a very important tool to be in a civilization, and we can see from the nature of how the meanings of words change. We can see how the religion influences language and so on. So that was the reason I wanted to have a basic understanding of these biblical languages so that I could go deeper and see at how these kind of operate, how the concepts operate right from the level of language.
I think we got a good handle on the different major monotheisms, definitely. So, how they are different from the natural religions into which I guess we as Hindus also fit. Um, what are some of the other religions today? Are there any similar to Vedic Hinduism?
So, if you look at polytheism or paganism, is of course very rich tradition in Asia. Asia is one continent which still has a dominance in polytheistic religion, especially under the influence of Chinese. If you see Chinese religion, and then you see Hinduism, and then you see Buddhism, and you see other kind of folk religions. They are surviving vibrantly even today. So, even though they may not be exactly similar to Hinduism, but we still see there is a lot of syncretism that has happened when ancient religions interacted. If you see Buddhism and how it interacted with China, and see Hinduism, how it interacted with Indonesia, exactly the same thing that I described to you happened. For example, I told you when Greeks conquered, the Egypt, they worshipped the Egyptian goddess Isis, and some other Egyptian gods became popular throughout the Greek world. Exactly the same thing happens when Hinduism spread to Indonesia. For example, if you go to a Bali and then people will show you this is Shiva, this is Vishnu, this is Brahma, but they won't look like anything like our Shiva, Vishnu, or Brahma. It's their own local deity, but they would have become identified with Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, in the scale of larger scheme of things. So we see lots of such syncretism in Asia. Through even though Hinduism and Buddhism are we can say Hinduism and Buddhism are not religions in the sense of Christianity or Islam in an exclusive framework, but they are just larger, umbrellas which can accommodate many identities and sub identities and sub identities under a single philosophical framework, and that's what we see happening. So, for example, when Buddhism interacted with Taoism in China, they Buddhism used Taoist vocabulary to convey its concepts in China, and it did not deny the existence of the Chinese gods. So we see a lot of syncretism where many lay people in China worship both Taoist deities and Buddhist deities, and they don't even know which is which.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, your story is really inspiring, and I hope many young people, many young Hindus come forward to learn so much about history and learn so much about other religions. Because unless we understand the history of religions and where we are placed in this whole picture, it's very hard to form an identity. And so I think you will inspire many other young people to do this kind of research, to learn different languages, go to source texts that we have not been studying much. What is your message for the young Hindus of today?
Thanks a lot. I think it's not like we Hindus have been a very inward-oriented culture. It's not like that. How else would Hinduism have spread to Indonesia and Southeast Asia? How else Buddhism would have spread to China and East Asia? If not for the, if not for the, if for our ancestors who took interest in learning about other cultures and other languages and other civilizational thoughts. So of course they were very interested, and that's why they could spread their faith there. But eventually, at some point in time, we seem to have lost it, and we began to be very inward looking. Uh, so I think now in a global world where religion is not an ethnic identity and it's a part of faith, and anybody can subscribe to any faith. Uh, I think in this era, religions can survive only if they're able to market themselves, correct? So
Mhm.
anything that does not withstand, that cannot, or that is not equipped to withstand the competition of the free market, is bound to die out in the modern capitalist economy. And that is why I think it's very important for Hindus to learn about other religions and articulate the differences between them very clearly so that they can, inspire more people to follow their faith. That's what that's why I think it's important, especially today.
Just coming to the last question for you, Ramaseshanji. You are a young person yourself. What do you wish that Hindu parents would do while raising their children?
I think I can't, normally I don't like giving advice, but I think parents should not think that religion is a post-retirement thing, unnecessary for youngsters. I think that mentality has to go first. Christian parents never think like that. Muslim parents never think like that. Then we are the only ones who, have the mentality of, just keep low and earn a lot of money, and then later when you are old you can think about religion. I don't think that is a mentality. Religion should go side by side along with other pursuits of life, and I wish parents could read more as well and convey this to their children and inspire them in their formative years so that they are able to become well-rounded adults who are well versed in both who they are and who the others are, and what makes us us and what makes us different from them. So that's what I would say.
So, with that, we come to the end of today's podcast. Thank you, Ramaseshan ji, for your time and for explaining the concepts of different religions. We hope our listeners have also found it equally enlightening to listen to these topics. You can listen to our podcasts on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Please subscribe to us at hinduparenting.substack.com. Follow us on X and on Instagram at the handle Hindu Parenting. Until next time, namaste.